Evening was falling on the small town of Cape Hill, located on the edge of a vast savannah reserve in northern Namibia. The sky was covered with heavy clouds, and soon a heavy downpour began, drumming on the roofs and windows of the local hospital. Sunbeam. This hospital, though small, was known for its warm attitude towards patients and the coordinated work of its staff. Despite the bad weather, the lights were still on inside, and the corridors were filled with the sounds of doctors and nurses rushing to their patients. Emma Kwanda, a nurse with 15 years of experience, sat at the duty desk, checking the shift log. The rain outside was getting heavier, and its monotonous sound was almost lulling. Suddenly, the silence was broken by the sound of the automatic bell at the front door. Emma looked up, expecting to see a late visitor or perhaps an emergency patient. But what she saw made her freeze. In the doorway, illuminated by the dim light of the street lamps, stood a large adult lion. His golden fur was wet from the rain, and his thick mane was matted with water, but he looked majestic. The lion did not roar or show aggression. He just stood there, looking around the room intently with his amber eyes. However, that was not what made everyone in the hall fall silent. In the lion's mouth he held a small bundle, as if it were a fragile vessel. When the beast slowly stepped forward and gently placed it on the floor, it became clear that it was not a bundle, but a small lion cub. The lion cub lay motionless. Its tiny body trembled, and one of its front paws was noticeably swollen, with bleeding wounds, as if it had been crushed by something heavy, perhaps a rock or a fallen tree. The atmosphere in the hospital became tense. Everyone froze, afraid to move. The lion father, as if realizing that he had brought his cub for help, raised his head and looked at each person in the hall. His eyes, full of anxiety but not threat, seemed to beg for salvation. Emma, despite her fear, gathered her courage. Her experience told her that she had to act quickly but carefully. She gestured to her colleagues to remain calm and took a step forward, looking closely at the lion cub. Its paw was in terrible condition. The bone was probably broken, and the wounds looked fresh and painful. Emma quietly called the senior doctor, Dr. Isaac Maber, and 2 other nurses to prepare the operating room for emergency care. To everyone's surprise, the lion did not try to interfere. He just sat at the entrance to the emergency room, keeping his eyes on the people and his cub. His silent presence was almost supernatural, as if he understood that his baby was in safe hands. Emma, trying not to make any sudden movements, carefully lifted the lion cub onto a stretcher with the help of the team. The lion shook his head slightly but remained in place, watching them go. Intense work began in the operating room. Dr. Kambururu, a trauma specialist, carefully examined the lion cub. An X-ray confirmed a broken paw, and the wounds required immediate treatment to prevent infection. The team worked smoothly. They washed and disinfected the wounds, applied a splint to the broken paw, and administered a mild sedative to the lion cub to ease the pain. All this time, Emma monitored the baby's condition, checking his pulse and breathing. At the same time, she contacted the manager of the local reserve, Tobias Nguni, and reported the unusual situation. Tobias promised to immediately send a team with the necessary equipment to safely transport the lions back to the reserve. He was amazed by Emma's story, and noted that he had never heard of a lion voluntarily coming to people for help before. After an hour and a half of intensive work, the doctors finished. The lion cub, although weak, began to show signs of life. He whimpered quietly, and his breathing became more even. The team carefully carried him back to the hall, where his father was still sitting. Seeing his cub, he slowly got up and approached. Everyone held their breath. The lion bent down and gently touched the lion cub's nose with his own, as if checking to see if everything was okay. Then he carefully picked up the cub in his mouth, just as gently as he had brought him here. Emma and her colleagues stood motionless, watching this touching scene. The lion, holding his cub, headed for the exit, but before disappearing into the darkness, he stopped. He turned his head and looked at Emma and the team of doctors. In his eyes, illuminated by the dim light of the hospital lamps, there was gratitude, deep, almost human. This moment was forever etched in the memory of everyone who witnessed the scene. When the reserve team arrived with cages and tranquilizers, they found that their services were not needed. The lion was already heading for the exit, carrying his cub. Tobias and his colleagues decided to follow him at a safe distance to make sure that both lions reached the reserve. By then, the rain had stopped, and night enveloped the savannah in silence, broken only by the occasional sounds of animals. Emma stood at the hospital door, watching the silhouettes of the lion and lion cub disappear into the darkness. Her heart was overflowing with emotion, a mixture of awe, pride, and amazement. She understood that she had just become part of something greater than mere medical care. It was a story about trust, about the connection between humans and nature, about how even a wild animal can sense who can be trusted with what is most precious. The next day, news of the incident spread throughout Cape Hill. Residents discussed the incident with amazement, and the local newspaper even published an article titled "The Lion Who Trusted Humans." Emma and her team became local heroes, although she herself believed that the real hero was the lion who overcame his instincts to save his cub. Reserve staff later reported that the cub, which they named Kuyo, meaning hope in the local dialect, was recovering quickly. The lion father, nicknamed Mantani, which means protector, was spotted in the reserve guarding his cub. Their story has become legendary, a reminder that in a world where humans and nature often clash, moments of amazing unity are possible. Thank you for taking the time to read this story. It reminds us how fragile and yet how strong the bond between humans and wildlife can be. If this story touched your heart, share it with your friends and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on more amazing stories.